False flag bioterrorism. Ever since 9/11 and the anthrax attacks of 2001, the public has been told that the next spectacular terror attack would involve biological agents engineered by shadowy terror groups.
At a Tucson gymnasium, people wait their turn for life-saving pills to be taken after an outbreak of a smallpox virus. Scenarios like these are taking place across the United States. Thankfully, they're only simulations.
Although we are fortunate not to have experienced a biological attack here in the United States since the anthrax attacks post-September 11th, the threat remains very real. Foreign adversaries have already demonstrated an interest in developing genetic and biological weaponry.
GNN has just learned a group calling itself A Brighter Dawn, or ABD, is claiming responsibility for the creation and intentional release of the Clade X virus. In a YouTube video, a spokesman for the group says the goal is to reduce the human population to pre-industrial levels. That, he says, will bring the world back into balance and prevent the destruction of the planet.
The Center for Disease Control is one of only 2 labs in the world which officially hold samples of the smallpox virus. The other is in Moscow. But now bioterror experts fear many other countries may have the virus, and there are concerns it could be used as a weapon. Bioterrorism experts envisage grim scenarios where a suicide bioterrorist, contagious with smallpox, walks through a busy airport infecting hundreds of others who spread the virus to their destinations.
Those warnings have only increased in urgency in this age of COVID.
We also face a new threat that the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of flu.
What else are we not listening to that we need to take action on now?
Well, the idea of a bioterrorist attack is kind of the nightmare scenario because they're a pathogen with a high death rate would be picked.
There will be likely a resurgence of COVID-19 this fall. It'll be greatly compounded by the challenges of seasonal influenza. Without better planning, 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history.
So we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time.
Statements like these not only implant in the public mind the idea that the next spectacular terror attack is likely to be biological, but that when such an attack occurs, we should immediately pin the blame on the shadowy terrorists who, we will likely be told, cooked the pathogen up in their bioweapons lab in the caves of Tora Bora. But just as anyone with national security experience immediately recognized that 9/11 was not the work of 19 men with box cutters, but in fact bore the hallmarks of a precisely coordinated intelligence operation, so too should the public be aware that those with the means, motive, and opportunity to create and disseminate a globally spreading infectious pathogen are not cave-dwelling terrorists, but well-funded government and military researchers. Although prohibited by the 1972 Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, the US has, in fact, maintained an illegal and secret germ warfare research program for decades. Long known to insiders, but formally denied by the US government, the existence of the program was confirmed in the pages of the New York Times on September 4, 2001, the same day that the invasion orders for Afghanistan were sent to President Bush for authorization, 1 week before the day that changed everything, and 2 weeks before the beginning of the anthrax false flag. Although the program was downplayed as foolish but not illegal, and portrayed as a defensive program that was largely curtailed in the wake of the end of the Cold War, a groundbreaking 2018 investigation by independent journalist Ilyana Gaitanjeva found that a network of Pentagon-run biolabs in ex-Soviet bloc states continues to this day to produce deadly bacteria, weaponized viruses, and toxins prohibited by the Biological Weapons Convention. But the US is certainly not alone in its multi-billion-dollar quest to develop more deadly, and more precise, biological agents. Britain's program, centered around the research at the UK's secretive Pordendown Bioweapon Laboratory, included the work of researchers like Vladimir Pisechnik, a microbiologist who had worked on the Soviet germ warfare program weaponizing anthrax and other biological agents before defecting to Britain in 1989. He was hired by the UK government to conduct his own research into anthrax antidotes at Pordendown, and died just weeks after the anthrax attacks took place. Dr. David Kelly, who debriefed Pesechnik after his defection and offered him the job at Pordendown, had told a friend that he was going to write a book exposing what he knew about the bioweapons program, but instead ended up dead on Harrowdown Hill under extremely suspicious circumstances. The Soviets also had an extensive biological weapons research program. The fruits of that program included the Novichok agent that has been blamed for high-profile assassination attempts in recent years, including the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, who were randomly discovered by the chief nursing officer of the British Army just 10 miles from the Pordendown bioweapons lab. It was even reported by the Sunday Times over 2 decades ago that Israel, which is not a signatory to the Biological Weapons Convention, has worked on developing a biological weapon that would harm Arabs while leaving Jews unaffected. The Israel Institute for Biological Research, where this research was conducted, is a continuation of Hamid Beit, a biowarfare unit in the Israel Defense Force whose founders believed that if microbiology could help in providing the means to establish the Jewish state, so be it. The Institute made headlines earlier this year for its groundbreaking research identifying coronavirus antibodies and its subsequent quest to develop an Israeli COVID-19 vaccine. But beyond the secret biological weapons programs, there has been a publicly acknowledged and funded program to weaponize viruses and pathogens that has been ongoing for years. And once again, the threat of bioterrorism has been invoked as a reason for funding this admittedly dangerous research to create the perfect bioweapon.
Bioterror there's always the potential for bioterror. And we have a major biodefense research and development effort that spans agencies, from the NIH to do the basic research to be able to develop better vaccines, how you counter engineered microbes, how you approach drug resistance engineered microbes. The CDC has surveillance mechanisms to determine if there's new microbes or anything out there in society particularly toxic that could be used in a bioterror situation. The Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, we do all of that.
This work, referred to as gain-of-function research, involves weaponizing biological agents so that scientists can develop vaccines or other defenses against them. Of course, gain-of-function research is, in its key aspects, identical to an offensive biological weapons program, but is simply framed as a defensive and preventative measure. The work of the researchers in this field has not been without controversy. In 1995, researchers dug up a victim of the 1918 Spanish flu from the Alaskan permafrost in order to resurrect the virus using genetic sequencing. In 2015, researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology participated in experiments weaponizing bat-derived coronavirus that even other molecular biologists warned was presenting the world with a clear and present danger. The research even received funding from U.S. aid, which was illegal at the time, as the U.S. had suspended funding for gain-of-function research in 2014. Time and again, those looking at the history of biowarfare are confronted by a key fact. Those who have dedicated their lives to weaponizing pathogens and dreaming up bioterror scenarios aren't the shadowy terrorist biologists in their cave fortress compound, but the government-funded researchers at both secret and public biolabs around the world. We have entered an age where the threat of a bioterror attack is very real. The only question facing the public now is, who are the real bioterrorists? And can we rely on government agencies, their appointed health authorities, and the corporate media to accurately identify those terrorists in the wake of the next spectacular terror attack? Conclusion. 2 decades ago, the idea of a false flag attack was incomprehensible to the general public. Why would the government attack itself, was the oft-heard question of those who could not imagine such duplicity being used to fool a nation into war. But this is not the world of 2001. It is 2020, and by now, nearly everyone is familiar with false flag operations. What was once an obscure tactic deployed by military and intelligence agencies in the shadowy world of spies and soldiers is now openly discussed and debated in the mainstream news. Make no mistake, this is a major step. An important tool of control, used to pull the wool over the eyes of the public for centuries, has gone from a laughable fringe conspiracy theory to an openly acknowledged and vigorously denied conspiracy reality within the space of 2 decades. But have we really learnt the lessons of history about false flag terrorism? Do we even really know what that term means? And would we recognize it if that trick were employed again in a different context? They say forewarned is forearmed. Nowhere is that adage more aptly applied than in the realm of false flag terrorism. The entire reason that these deception operations have been used by country after country for centuries is that they are so effective. But they are only effective because throughout those centuries, the general public was unable to wrap their minds around a trick so devious and downright evil. Now we have to completely break the spell that governments have cast over the public. In the event of any spectacular terror attack, biological or otherwise, we have to take the history of false flag operations into account and put the government at the top of the list of suspects. When enough of the population has adjusted their thinking in this way, the trick will have lost its effectiveness, and those seeking to direct society through fear will have to abandon it altogether. This is a monumental task, but it is not to be taken lightly. Given the infrastructure for full-scale medical martial law that has been carefully laid over the past 2 decades, and given the lockdowns, forced vaccinations, enforced unemployment, and digital dollars tied to social credit scores that have been promised by those seeking to put us through the Great Reset, the future of humanity may depend on our response to the next bioterror attack. The only question is, can we wake up enough of the public to these tricks before the real bioterrorists launch their next false flag operation?
So we, we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time. Mm-hmm.